Hello everybody, my name is Kyle Lee, aka Kilo Loco from kiloloco.com, and today we're going to be going over MVC. I use something I consider to be called MVC-S. It's not like a real design pattern that I've seen. It'd be closest compared to MVC-N, which would stand for networking, but I call it S. So it'd be model, view, controller, and then I call this services. This is because there's usually you end up with utilities, things that do other things that are just other than networking. Okay, so this kind of helps me break down my project, and this is how I organize my projects. Now there's a lot of different ways that you can design your project and have it laid out, but I'm gonna just show you the way that I do it. All the tools that I'm going to be using today are Xcode 9 Beta 2 and Swift 4. But obviously it doesn't matter what these are because you can always use MVC-S in any of your projects. It doesn't even have to be Swift. Skill level, I set this to beginner. All you really need to do is understand Swift language, because what we're going to do is I'm going to actually go through an entire project of how I'm going to lay it out, starting from scratch, and know how to perform networking requests. If you don't know how to perform networking requests, I have a couple of videos on that. But the only reason why you need to know this is because I'm not going to really explain everything that I'm doing and why everything's working if you don't know how networking requests work. And then you'll be able to find the completed project right here at my GitHub page under MVC, and that will be the finished project since we're starting from scratch, so there's no beginner project. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so this is a basic single view application. All you have to do is just start up your Xcode and open up a new project, and this is what I have. I just called it MVC-S. As you can see, everything's the same over here. The only thing that I did add was this link right here, which is what we're going to be using. This is JSON placeholder.typicode. This is just somewhere that we're going to get our posts from so that we can create a model and we can perform networking requests to this location. So I just have it right here in the comments. And everything else is the same. App delegate's the same. Main storyboard's the same. There's nothing on the storyboard. We're just starting from the beginning, guys. All right. So what I usually do is I'll create two groups when I first start off. I'll create a global, and I will create whatever the feature that I'm trying to design. Now, I create folders for each new feature, so that's very important on how I design my projects and to keep them very clean. And for this one, we're just going to be going through posts, so I'm going to just call this post. We could always change it later, but this is how I do it. So under post, I'm going to do MVC-S, which is model, view, controller, service, right? Model. Well, actually, I usually do this backwards because they see how they insert the new folder. So I'll do service, new group, controller, right? And then new group, view, right? And then I'll put it up here. And then it'll just look like this. So for each feature that I have in the app, for each main area of the app, this is the structure that I have for each feature. I do the same thing for global, but I only start off with what I need. Usually that's just service. And I'll get into what I'm going to put into service a little bit later. And as I go, I may add a model, or I may add a controller, or whatever is needed. But for right now, we're just going to keep it on service because that's usually what ends up in global. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to get our current stuff already going. So the only thing that we have set up so far is a view, and that's going to be our main storyboard because this storyboard is supposed to only be our posts. So let's go ahead and change that. This will be our post storyboard. right? And what I'll do is I'll put this storyboard in my view under post. This way, the storyboard's always associated with whatever feature that I'm using, which is the post, obviously. Another thing that we could do right now for global is we could open this up and we could do view. And what I could do is I could put my launch screen, because that's global. That's something that I'm not going to be using really, and things like that. Now for the view controller, let's go ahead and change this to post VC. So post view controller, right? And I'll put this in my view controller. And then app delegate, that's more of a controller. So we can throw that in under controller in global, right? App delegate controller. And we'll move this to keep it ordered. And then also we have under view, we could put our assets in there as well, because our assets are global. So this is one way that you can do it. Services, info.plist, I don't really know. I wouldn't necessarily put it in services, but it could go there. It just kind of depends. So since we want to just keep things clean, let's go ahead and do that. Let's, I don't know. I kind of usually leave the info.plist just hanging out for quick, easy access, but this is fine too. And then lastly, what I'll do is I'll also keep these in alphabetical order, and that's all. Maybe you want the global always at the top, maybe you don't, but yeah. All right. So now all we're going to do is we're going to go into our storyboard and we're going to start setting up the application. Now, what I want to do is I just want to be able to have a bunch of cells and display each of the posts, right? So let's go ahead and do that. First thing that we need to do is we need to get a table view. If I know how to spell view, there we go, right? Okay. And you know what? I think I want a nav bar just to make it look a little bit sexier. So let's go ahead and throw a nav bar in there. Yeah. Now we're looking extra sexy. That's the way I like it. Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and make this nav bar 64 because I want it to look a little bit sexy, right? Oh, that's right. They don't like us using, in the new Xcode, they don't like us using, our nav bars like this. I'm not going to go into that right now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin it to the top because this is just to make it look a little bit sexier, and that's all we really want. So let's go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to stretch this out, and we're going to pin it as well. So now we have our table view set up. Next, we want to throw a cell in there, a table view cell. Now, I think this is pretty normal, pretty straightforward. If you've done any iOS development, you have probably gone through this process before, right? Because table views are probably the most common things that you work with when you do iOS development. And I don't think this is out of the ordinary, so I'm not going to go too deep into explaining what I'm doing. But what I do want to do is go back over to our controller, our post VC. I want to look at the data that we're going to be getting back, right? And I want to be able to display that properly. Now we have an ID, don't really need to display that, but we do have a title and a body. Now, by default, the UI table view cell does come with a title and a details, but just to show you how things work, we're going to just make our own, and this way we have a little bit more control. So what we'll do is we'll have two labels in here. Or you know what, just to make it a little bit different, I'll use a text view for the other one. but this one will be our title. If I could drag this, yeah. So this one will be our title, so I'll just put title in there for right now. And then the other one will be a text view. So just in case there's a lot of information to display. Right, and let's just, yeah. I mean, it's not gonna look super sexy, but it should get the job done, right? All right, so now all we wanna do is we just wanna make sure everything's pinned and everything stays where it's supposed to. Now, I know I like to keep things sexy, but this isn't gonna look too sexy. It's just gonna look like whatever sexy. Yeah. So now we have these two views, right? So we have the title and we have the text view. Now we need to be able to manipulate those, right? We need to be able to put in our own information into the title and the text view. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a new view. Now this is the object that we want to do, and we're going to put it in our view folder. And before I continue any further, just in case you guys aren't fully aware of how model view controller kind of work and service, let me just break it down real quick. So pretend like you're a book writer, right? And a model is going to be where you have the data, and the view is going to be a book. The controller is going to be you, and the service, well, that's going to be the different things as an author or a book writer that would help you, right? So in our example, the model would be the data, and the data would be the thoughts in your head, or yeah, whatever you think that you're going to be writing before you actually put it on a piece of paper, right? The view would be either the computer or the book or whatever you want to call it, but the view is what is actually going to bring it into the world and actually allow you to see it. The controller is you, and you're the person that takes the model, the data, and you're the one that applies it to the view, right? And you handle all that stuff. So that's why you're the controller. Now the services would be things like the internet, the library, anything that helps you write that book, right? So this is kind of like how I think about it. So when I'm making an application or a feature, I'm thinking about it, okay, I have this idea of a feature in my head, the model, and I need to display it on the app in the view. And I'm the controller because I'm the one that types out the code, or I'm the one that's writing the book. And my service is, well, I don't have the data, so I may have to go out to the internet and get it, right? So I hope that makes sense. All right, let's continue. As I was saying, we want to make a new file in our view group. And this one will be a Cocoa Touch class because we want to subclass the table view cell, see? So what we'll do is we'll just call this one post cell. Pretty straightforward if you ask me. And we're just going to go ahead and create that. Now, we don't need any of this stuff in here. We're going to just go ahead and delete this. So we do have two things that we want access to, right? We want access to the title, and we want access to the details, or what do they call it? They call it the body. Okay, we'll call it body too. So we'll have title and body. So what we'll do is we'll go up here, and we want to make sure that we're going to access our cell class, our post cell. Now notice this is our view controller, which we need to rename to post VC, which I forgot to do. That's just this file right here. That's what that is. So I had to change it. So I hope I didn't confuse anybody by doing that. All right. Anyway, so it's opening to this. That's not what we want to edit. We want to edit the actual cell. So we'll go to recent files, and we'll just go down to post cell and make sure it's not the interface. We want to go to this one, the regular. Now what we can do is we can right click and drag or control click and drag. Oh, first, my bad. First, what we have to do, since that didn't work, we have to make sure that we're selecting the cell, right? We go over here. For the class, we want to make sure it's a post cell. Okay, now that it's a post cell and that they're actually connected, the storyboard and everything, now we could drag it into here and we could just say this is going to be our title label, right? And then for this, we'll just call this our body text view. Body text view. Call it whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. We close this back up. And we're going to go over to our post cell. And now we can edit it, right? So since everything's, since all the UI is set up in the storyboard, we don't need to do a wake from nib or anything like that. All we're going to need to do is be able to set up the data, send the data to this, and populate the UI accordingly, right? So what we do is we usually end up writing a function called configure. And this what we're going to be configuring, we're going to be configuring with a post. So we're going to pass in a post, and we're going to pass in a post and use that post information to populate the UI. And this will be of type post. But problem is that we don't have a post object yet, right? We don't have a post in our model. So we actually have to create that. So let's go ahead and create that right now. New file. And since we're not subclassing anything, we're going to just use a Swift file and we're going to create our own. Now, I'll call this post and we'll do enter. And this will be our post object. Now, the one thing about, I'll just do save anyway. The one thing about the models in my projects is that the majority of them, hold on, let me see what this is. Oh, that's right. It's saying that we don't have a post. As I was saying before, the majority of the models in my project are structs. And the reason for that is because they're only supposed to hold a value and they generally don't change. So we want to use a value type for that. So what I'll do is I'll choose a struct, and you can do the same thing with class. It's really up to your preferences. If you want a video on structs versus classes, I could do that, but we're not going to go into it here. But just a general rule of thumb, for most of my models, they're going to be structs. And I just kind of follow that rule. So we're going to call this post. Now we want to go back over to the internet and we want to look at the information that we're going to be storing, right? So we have a user ID, we have an ID of the post, we have a title and a body. So what I'll do is I'll store all that information, and that will be how I create my post. So we'll do struct, or no, not struct, I'm sorry. We'll do let user ID be of type, I think these are going to come back as integers. So we'll just put them as integers for right now. And then when we actually do the networking, we'll test and see if that's what's coming back. So now I'll do ID. So we're just doing all the fields that we just looked at, right? And I think that the ID is an integer. We'll do title. And this will be of type string. And then we'll do body. And that will also be of type string. Right? So now our post object has a user ID, an ID, a title, and a body. And when we initialize it, we'll store some information in here. Let me see what the expected. I think, yeah, Xcode's just tripping out. So now whenever we refer to this post object, we'll be able to access any of these. Now I could go into, something might be, I'll go into the parsing a little bit later when we're doing the networking. I'm sorry. So let's go back over to our post cell, and we'll notice that this should update, and it will allow us, and it should actually change color because it is one of our objects. It'll turn green in a couple minutes whenever Xcode decides to wake up. All right, so remember that our post object has the title value and a body value. So what we'll do now is we'll do self.title label, or well, you could just do title label because they're kind of distinguished by their types. Anyway, I'll do title label.text is equal to post.title. So we're going to access the text property from the label and set it to our post.title property. Now we'll do the same thing for the body text view. Body text view.text is equal to post.body. And now we have set up our UI cell, or our post cell. Now things are looking pretty sexy. Everything's condensed and everything's really, super clean. So, next thing that we need to do is we need to start networking. Now we'll start off by doing that in our view controller, just so that we can get things going. Now, Xcode's slowing down on me. Don't slow down on me, Xcode. Why are you doing that? All right, sorry about that, guys. Xcode decided to crash on me. That's what happens with beta stuff. So it looks like we lost all that. So let's go ahead and set that up again. We'll do title label dot text is equal to post dot title, right? And then body text view dot text is equal to post dot body. All right, look at that. Nice and sexy, nice and clean. I like it. Yeah, we're getting places. We're going places. We're getting somewhere, guys. All right, so like I said, we don't need this. The did receive memory warning. We're not looking for memory stuff. And for the networking, we're going to test it out right here in the view controller first. So what we'll do is we'll set up a session. First we have to set up a request, we could just, since this is get, what we're going to do is we're just going to do the get. So we could just set up a session. So session equals URL session dot default or shared, right? And then now for session, let task equal session dot data task with URL. What we can do is we could just use this URL right here. We'll just pass this directly in for right now. Whoops, I did the wrong thing. Sorry. Data task. We want to use this one right here with the completion handler because we want to handle what comes back, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Data task with URL. Paste that in there. We'll click on here. We'll press enter. We're just going to pass in, let's say this is data. We'll say response and error. Now I'm not going to use the response and error. You know me in my videos, I don't really go into error handling. It's just something I don't be doing. All right, I think this should be working. I think Xcode's tripping. So what we'll do is we'll do guard let data equals data, else return. So as long as there's data, we should be able to move forward. And from that data, we should be able to get JSON, right? So do, and we'll do let JSON, or let JSON equal try JSON serialization dot, and we want to read the data, so we'll do reading options. We'll pass in our data, and for the options, we'll just do none. And then we'll just print our JSON. And then we should be able to do task.resume, baby. Yeah. Now, I'm not really sure why this is acting up. What did I do wrong? Huh. That's weird, huh? Okay, let's try that again. Session.data task with URL response. What did it do differently? Session.data task. Okay. I don't know what I did wrong, guys, but okay. We'll just use that one. And we'll pass this in. Oh, you know, my bad. You can't do that. So let URL, I don't know why I did capital, equal URL, and we'll pass in a string, and we'll pass in this. This way we can use our URL and everything looks nice and sexy. Yay! Sexy! Yay! URL. There we go. That's what I did wrong. And we want to make sure that this is unwrapped. Guard let else return. So we're just unwrapping that URL, making sure that everything's good. We should be able to proceed, and yeah. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and run this and make sure that everything's gonna work properly. All right, guys, sorry about that. Was running into a little bit of a problem. The reason why it wasn't working was because I forgot to put a little catch block over here, so it was throwing me off. I was starting to see red right here and didn't understand what was going on. So yeah, just make sure that you do the catch for the try. And also the info.plist was not found while I was in global, which is probably why I usually leave it hanging out. But yeah, you could reroute where the info.plist is if you wanted to do that, but let's keep it hanging out for right now. And let's just keep going and make sure that this works right here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our URL, pass it into this data task. We're gonna come back, get the data. We're gonna print that JSON. And yeah, if that works, then we can start refactoring this as well. So let's go ahead and try it. And if everything works, we should be able to start moving on and start getting things to start looking real sexy for us, because that is the whole goal. Yeah, get it looking sexy for us. All right, so it crashed. Another thing that I forgot to do is make sure you click on the view controller, change this to post VC. Got to make sure that you do these things, Kyle. All right, so now that we got everything going and it should be coming back with our JSON. All right, we ran into another crash. And we want to just make sure that over here in our project that it's no longer looking at main. We want it to look at our post storyboard. All right, now I think it's gonna work. Okay, let's see, Kyle, you know what you're doing? Oh, there we go. We got all of our JSON back. Okay, so that's really good. Okay, so now we're getting our JSON back, right? And now we can start using these and setting things up. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to move this networking request into one of the into a different area, because we don't want it in the view controller, right? So we don't want it in our post VC. So this will get things very cluttered very quickly. And this is another thing for beginners, is that they'll put a lot of their stuff in the actual view controller. And that's what will actually separate you from somebody else if you're going out for a job. So let's make sure that we do that. What I will usually do is I'll put the networking service, or I'll put a networking layer into our service area. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll do new file. Now, since this is a service, my services are usually classes, and we're going to just start off with a new Swift file because we're not subclassing anything, right? So go ahead and go over to next. Come on, Xcode, let's do this. All right, so what I like to call mine are networking service. Now there will only be one of these things since it's in the global, right? And like I said, it'll be a class, and I'll call it network, if I know how to spell, networking service. And the first thing that I'm going to do is, since this is going to be a networking service and that it requires a lot of threading, we want to add a Singleton instance. That just means that we're going to always be using the same networking service object. We're not going to create new ones or anything like that. We're always going to reference the same networking object. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll just do let, and we'll actually have to do static. So static let shared, just like you would normally see, like over here in our post view controller, you see the shared. That's a singleton. So we're going to essentially follow the same pattern, and we'll do shared is equal to, we want to do networking service, and we'll initialize it just like so, because there are no properties that we're going to pass to it. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that no one can initialize a networking service object outside of this class. So what we have to do is we have to put access control on it. So we'll do private private init, and the regular initializer, that is just this, and we're not doing anything in there. So now nobody can initialize a networking service object outside of this class. Next, what we'll do is we'll actually put all of our code that we did over here in the post view controller, and we'll use all of this same code. We're going to cut it out, right? And we'll put it in a function in here that's called, we'll just call it func get data. And you could call it whatever you want. And what we're going to do is we're going to paste it in here. Now, obviously we want to make this as reusable as possible. So instead of passing in a URL, what we can do is we can pass in, instead of always having it set to this URL, we can pass in a URL. So we'll do from URL, and we'll just say URL, and this will be of type URL, right? Seems to make sense to me. How about to you? All right, so now we could take this URL out. And now when we call this function, we have to pass in a URL, and that URL will be used right there. We'll be able to get the data, and we'll be able to print the JSON. Now, we don't want to just print this JSON. We actually want to use this JSON. So that's where a completion handler comes in. If you're not really familiar with completion handlers, then make sure you watch my video on callbacks and threading. Completion, and we'll just say that it's going to be at escaping, and it's going to return void. So we want to return something, and JSON is a dictionary. Or actually, well, it's not a dictionary. I usually turn into a dictionary, but we'll just pass in any right here for right now. So what this will do is it will allow us to call completion, pass in our JSON, and then be able to reuse it from a different class. So let's go ahead and call completion, and then we'll pass in this JSON, and that will allow us to get it wherever we use this get data. All right, now that we have our networking service layer set up, what we'll do is we'll go over to our post area, and what we want to do is we want to add a service in there as well. Now this one will specifically handle calls that are, it's going to be our post networking. It's going to be for our posts and doing networking requests, I should say, and we'll be using this networking service to get the data and then create an object from that. So let's go ahead and do that. So in service, we'll do Swift new file. And I'm just going to call this one post networking. Now this is a really confusing naming convention because it's called post, and post means something different in networking, but this is for our post object. Like each post, like each tweet, it would be like tweet, or like Instagram photo or whatever, it'd be like that. So that networking, that's how I go about it. What we'll do is remember that this is a service, so we'll make sure we'll do class, and we'll call this post networking. And we're going to do the same exact thing that we did to our networking service, right? So we want to make sure that it's initialized only inside of this class, and we want to we're not actually going to make it a shared instance because we already have a shared instance. We're actually going to use static functions. So I'll show you that right now. So private init. This way they can't create a post networking object outside of this class. But now for each function, so like let's say get posts, right? That's going to be one of our calls. I'm sorry, we'll call it func get posts, and that's going to do something, right? Well, what that's going to do is going to use our networking service. So we'll do networking service dot shared dot get data, and we're going to pass in a URL. So guard let URL equals URL, and we're just going to initialize the URL just like we did before with the string else return. And you could do way more stuff with this, but this is still the same convention that I usually follow. Let's see. You know what? I don't have that URL, so I need to go back and copy it. Let's go ahead and copy that bad boy. We're going to paste it in here. So now we have this URL. We have the URL that we're passing into here. And now we have access to our JSON. So this will be our JSON. A lot of people like to call this response, or they like to call it result. I'm going to keep it JSON. I think that's more straightforward because that's what we're passing to it. Now, the structure of what we're going to be doing is, let's first go over what we're going to be doing, right? So now we're going to be getting this data, and now we want to do something with it. Well, when we get this data, we need to actually turn it into an object. We need to turn the response into an entire object. So let's go ahead and do that right now. Now, what I want to do is I want to take this JSON, I want to pass it into some other model or object, and I want to create a response that I can use that makes everything very, I don't know the words, like everything fit together very nicely, I should say. So let's go ahead and just make sure that we can get that. So first thing we want to do is we want to just see what this looks like. So we're going to get our post object, and it's just going to be a bunch of these little posts, right? Because this would be one post, this would be two posts, right? So we need to handle that response. What I'll do is I'll usually go into whatever the feature, I'll go into the model, and then I'll create a new group, and this one I call responses. And this will just be a bunch of my different response objects for this specific feature. Now I'll create a new file, Swift file, and I'll call this get posts response. So I usually call it whatever this is, whatever the function name is, and then I put response at the end of it so I can distinguish what object it is. Now, what we want to do is we want to create a struct. Remember I said the majority of the things that I put in my model group, they're going to be structs. And that's just because we're not going to be doing any subclassing or anything like that. So let's go ahead and call this get posts response. And the way that I like to initialize things is I want to do initialize with JSON, and right now we're not going to do any we're not going to specify what the JSON looks like. We'll just say any because that's what we're passing from the data, right? And we want to specify that this throws. Now the reason I choose to do throws is because it allows you to do a lot of different error handling. I'm not going to get too deep into error handling right now, but I shouldn't switch screens while I'm talking, but I can do a video for you guys on error handling, but I choose throws because it's a little bit more specific and allows me to debug my code a lot easier. So now what I'll do is I'll go into global, and now I need a model for my global because I need to make an enum for each of the problems that I might run into when running into a networking error. So I'll create a new file. And I'm sorry that I'm jumping around a little bit, guys, but this is, I create these objects as I go. It wouldn't make sense for me to create everything all at once and not use it right away for me. That's just how I see it. So I'll do networking error. I'll call this networking error, and this is going to be an enum. This way I can throw, you'll see, watch. So it's going to be an enum. And it's going to be obviously called networking error. And then it's going to conform to the protocol error, which will allow me to throw it when there's something wrong that pops up. So right now we're only going to have one case, and I'll just say some error. Usually I'd have a couple of different ones to specify what the error entails, and based off of the response and all these different things, and it kind of just depends on what API you're working with. But right now we just want something very basic, very generic, and I'll just specify some error. Now, and I want to be able to use this in any of my features, right? So I'm going to be able to have it in the posts. I'm going to be able to have it in, like if I was doing users, I'll be able to have it in each of those different features. So let's go back over to the post, the get post response, right? And what I'll do is I'll do guard let, and this will be, we want to start breaking down this response, right? So it's an array, right? So I'll just say an array is equal to JSON as an array of dictionaries, right? So we can do it this way. This is the way that usually I would type alias, but I'm not going to go into all that. No need for the extra confusion. But this is an array of dictionaries. So we have string, right? And any, else return, or else we're going to throw networking error dot some error, right? So our JSON is always going to be, our JSON is coming back as an array of dictionaries, right? And the dictionary is always going to be a string. The key is always going to be a string, right? But the value can be anything. It could be an integer, it could be a string. We don't know what's coming back. So that's why we're specifying it like this. So as long as this array is able to, as long as we can parse this JSON into an array of dictionaries of string and any, then we can move forward and we can create posts from that. Now, what we want to do is in our response, we want to be able to access something. There's no point in creating a response object if we're not going to use it in some way, right? So the reason we're using this is so that we could get posts from it, right? And posts will be of type post, an array of posts, right? So now what we can do is we can do for item in array, we'll create a post object from that item, right? Well, the problem with that is that right now for our post, where is our post object right here, it doesn't have an initializer. So now we need to create an initializer. So init and what we're going to pass into it is a dictionary of string and any, right? So we'll just say dict of string and any. The other thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that this is a failable initializer so that either we're going to be able to create a post object from what we're specifying here, or we're not. If we cannot create one, then it returns nil, and that makes it so that it's all or nothing, and that we make sure that our post is going to work or it's not, and it's not going to cause any crashes anywhere else. All right, so with that being said, what we want to do is we want to wrap everything in a guard statement, and we need to initialize each of these objects. So now we need to go through the JSON. We need to unwrap body, ID, title, and user ID. What I usually like to do is I like to follow this, whatever this order is, I like to follow in my guard statement just because that's how I do it. So we'll do say guard let user ID equals dict, and then we'll specify that this one's going to be called user ID. And you can make things decodable, but if you're still working with Swift 3, then you can't do this easily. And I'm doing it this way just so that you guys can see what the process used to be and kind of understand how things are done. And then when you want to use the decodable protocol, you can do that as well. But I'm going to save that for another video. And then, so we think this is going to be an integer, right? Next, we do let ID equal dict. And this is going to be ID as string, or no, I'm sorry. We think it's going to be int. Next we do let title equal dict title as string, and let body equal dict body as string, right? Else return nil. So either I'm going to be able to parse this dict and get out the user ID, the ID, title, and body, or else it's nil. All or nothing, baby. All or nothing. So now what we'll do is do self.userid is equal to, guess what? User ID. Bam. Look at that. ID is equal to ID. Bam. Self.title equal to title. Self.body equal to body. All right. So now we have an initializer that we can use, and once we pass in a dictionary, we'll be able to create a post object. So let's go back to our response, and we want to use what we just created, right? So each item is going to be a dictionary of string and any. That means that we'll be able to initialize our post object. So, and remember that it's failable, so we'll do guard let post equal post, and we'll initialize this with a dictionary, and then we'll pass in item, right? Else, and we'll just say continue so that it keeps going through over the array. So now since we're doing it in a for in loop, I usually use map, but we'll do a for each loop or whatever. We have to have a variable out here, so we'll do var posts is equal to post, and it's just going to be an empty array of posts, right? Now what we can do is we could do posts dot append our post. So now if we are able to successfully initialize a post object from this item, then we'll just append it to the posts right here, and we'll just say self.posts is equal to posts. See how all this is starting to fit together very nicely? All right. So now we have the get posts response, right? So what we need to do is we need to go back over to our post networking. And just like before, we need to be able to use the information, just like we did in our networking service right here, where we did the completion and we were passing that data so that it could be used elsewhere. We're going to do that same exact thing. So let's go over to post networking, and we're going to put in a completion handler right here. So we'll call it completion. And we'll just say, let's get the layout for it first, and make sure that you specify at escaping. All right, so what we're going to do is the completion has to return a get post response object. So we'll say get post response. Now, when we have this JSON, we'll be able to initialize a get post response object by passing it in there, right? And we'll be able to return it. So let's go ahead and do that. So do, remember it throws, do, and we're going to do let response equal try get post response, initialize this with the JSON that we're getting from the get data, right? Oh, make sure that you do the catch down here, or else Xcode is going to start whining. And then with this response, we could return it right here. So completion, and we're going to just pass in our response, right? All right, so I hope that makes sense so far. Now what we want to do is we want to go back to our post VC, and we want to use the post networking call that we just made, the get post, but we can't do that yet because we can't initialize a post networking object. So what we have to do is we have to set this to static, which will allow us to access the function without initializing the object. So let's go back to our post VC and let's go ahead and try to do that. So post networking dot get post, and it's, oh, you know what? It's because it didn't save yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and save it. This way we can have access to what it is that we want. So let's try that again. Post networking dot get posts, right? Enter. And we're going to press enter again. And now we can just say response, right? And if we get this response, we'll just print that response, right? And look at how small the view controller is right now. It's still super small, super tiny. And that's what we want to aim for when we're doing our stuff. So if everything works as expected, we should be able to get our posts in post objects, and it should be able to print each of those post objects. So let's see what happens. All right, looks like it's working. Only problem is that it's kind of messy. So what we can do, just so that you guys can see it again and make sure that everything looks right, remember that we have our response and it has posts in it. And what we want to do is we'll say let posts equal response dot posts, and then we'll put in a for each loop for post. And we're not going to use this later, but I just want you to be able to see it. For posts in posts, right? We're going to print the post. So this will print it in a nice readable fashion. And notice how simple it is. We're able to use the response, access the post property, which does all the handling for it, keeps this nice and clean, and we're able to do whatever we want with those posts. So it's still a little bit messy because of the body is like really big, or like the titles are kind of big, and then the body's like really big too. So it's a little bit messy, but you can see each post is being printed out, right? All right, so we got that all up and running. Now what we need to do is we need to be able to use these posts. So I'm gonna go ahead and delete this because we're not using that. That was just to print them out. Now we want to put a variable up here called posts, and we're gonna go ahead and initialize this right off the bat, and you'll see why in a minute. This is gonna be an array of empty array of posts, and we'll say self.posts is equal to posts, right? Now we have this variable up here and it's ready to be accessed. All right, so remember that we have back in our storyboard, we have this table view. Now, as of right now, we don't have any access to this table view in our post VC. So let's go ahead and change that. And we'll say, or actually, it'll probably be better for you guys if I did it dragging and dropping, huh? So I'll go ahead and go up here. Make sure that we go to the right thing. We want to make sure that we go to the right view controller, post VC, right? And what we'll do is we'll access our table view. We'll drag, drop, and we'll just say table view, right? Also, what we want to do, we can close this for now. What we want to do is we want to make sure that we drag and drop table view to the view controller, or post view controller, and we connect the data source and the delegate. So make sure you do that. Delegate, and that will allow us to use the delegate and data source for table views. So now what we could do is we could do an extension of our post VC, and this extension is going to conform to UI table view data source, right? And before we go any further, let's go ahead and put everything that we need in here. So we're going to have number of sections in row. Right now we'll just return, well, we're only going to have one, right? Number of rows in section, that's going to be equal to however many posts that we have. So let's go ahead and set that to return posts.count. And then we need to do cell for row at index path. And I said that we needed to connect the delegate. I forgot that we're not going to be clicking on anything, so you don't need to do it. I was thinking did select row at index path, but we're not going to be doing that. So if you were to only connect data source, then that's all you would need to do. My bad. So we need to return a UI table view cell, right? Which we have subclassed as post cell. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So we'll do guard let cell equal table view dot DQ reusable cell with identifier, and I didn't set an identifier on the table cell just yet, but we'll go ahead and do that. And we're going to call it post cell, same thing that we call it over here. You can call it whatever you want and have them different, but it's not like a wise thing to do, but you could do that. And this is going to be, we're going to cast it as a post cell. Else we're going to return just a UI table view cell, just a regular empty table view cell if we can't do that, because we need to return the UI table view cell if anything. And then for right now, just to shut it up, we'll say return cell, right? All right. So let's make sure that we do this first. So I'm going to go ahead and copy post cell. I'm going to go back to my storyboard, and we want to go to the post cell. We want to open up the right side, and we have the class correct, but we need to change the identifier. So we need to set our reuse identifier to post cell or whatever we entered into the code. And let's go down. So now that's connected. And since this is of type post cell, we'll be able to use our configure class that we made at the beginning of the tutorial. Configure with post, right? So first let's access the correct post. So let post equal, we'll do posts, and we're going to select the one at index path dot row, and then we're going to pass that post into our configure. So cell dot configure with post, and we'll pass in our post. So now when we call this, and if everything's working properly, we should have a fully functional app. Yeah. Oh, I forgot one major important thing. Notice that this is going to change. Oh, maybe it won't change. All right. I actually forgot two different things. So one thing that I forgot to do is once we set this up, we have to refresh, right? Our table view. We have to reload the data. Self dot table view dot reload data, right? The other thing is that our networking layer is still running in the background. So we go over to our service. Wait, this is supposed to be in model. I don't know why I didn't do that. Sorry, guys. Model. and we'll put that networking error in there. Okay. So remember that this is all running in the background. What we have to do is we have to do dispatch queue dot main dot async, and that will make all of our code run in the foreground. So we'll just go ahead and copy that, put it right here, and now that'll bring it to the main thread, and now everything should be working properly. So let's go back to our post view controller. Let's see what happens. And if you, whoops, sorry about that. If you notice, everything's working. Well, it's kind of weird because we have the table view, so it doesn't scroll as simply. But yeah, so we have each of these posts, and as you can see, they are all different. And that's it, guys. Notice how condensed the file structure is. If I wanted to do like the same exact thing with users, I would follow the same pattern. So let's say we had a new group, or let's say we had a new feature, right? We just go over to new group. I would just say users, right? And let's say, you know, I wanted to do all the same thing. I'd just do service, controller, view, model. And now I'd be able to put a whole new feature or whatever I wanted in here. Like for users, I would, like, if you're talking about a user object, I would put it in global because that's something that you'd use global. But like, let's just pretend that users was a different thing, right? Or maybe it's like, you know, chat. That's a better example, right? Chat. It's something completely different. It's a new feature, and now it has the same folder structure. Everything's, you know, you could either do it like this, or, you know, keep global at the top, however you want. It doesn't really matter. But now we have everything all segregated, and now whenever you want to go in and work on something specific, you could like be like, oh, you know what? I need to go in and work on the storyboard for the posts. So let's go over to the storyboards and we'll do that, right? Or maybe I just need to work on the response because now the response is different, you know, things like that. So I hope that this video was helpful. I try to be as thorough as possible on how I do the design patterns. And you know, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Just to let you know, I haven't really experimented with MVVM. It kind of confuses me in the cases that you would use it, because there are a few limitations that I don't like you know, storyboards. The use of storyboards is kind of weird with it. And also, I know that some people are interested in Viper. I don't do Viper. That one was extremely confusing. I couldn't figure it out myself yet. But MVC is a very simple way to break down your project. And then with this S extension that I added onto it, or N, or whatever you want to call it, I think that it's a whole lot easier to read and, you know, follow. Like, somebody coming on won't need to go through training to understand what I'm doing here. If you know MVC, then you know how this works. MVVM, you have to go through and you have to learn stuff. Viper, you have to go through and learn stuff. So I think that this is like the easiest way to do it. You know, if you disagree, then let me know. But yeah. Yeah, so make sure that you guys like the video, you subscribe, and leave some comments. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thanks for coming around. Once again, my name is Kyle Lee, aka Kilo Loco from kiloloco.com. And as always, code passionately.